Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why life suddenly feels so heavy? You go through the day like everyone else. You smile, you answer messages, you go to work, you take care of the people you love. You do everything you're supposed to do. You go through the day like everyone else. But then the day ends. You close the door. The room becomes quiet. The world stops asking things from you. And all the thoughts you've been trying to ignore come rushing back. You ask yourself, why is this happening to me? Have my prayers gone unheard? Why does it feel like everyone else is moving forward while I'm standing still? Maybe you've prayed for an answer. Maybe you've waited for a sign. Maybe you've done everything you know how to do, and yet nothing seems to change. And on the hardest nights, you don't ask for success. You don't ask for money. You don't even ask for all the answers. You simply whisper, God, please don't leave me alone in this. If you've ever prayed those words, then I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Not because life is easy, not because every problem disappears overnight, but because there is something many people don't realize until much later. Silence is not the same as absence. A seed buried beneath the ground looks forgotten until the day it breaks through the soil. The night feels endless until the first light appears on the horizon. And sometimes the heart that feels the most abandoned is actually the closest to a new beginning. Tonight, I want to take you on a different kind of journey. Not across countries or oceans, but into the quiet places of the human heart, the place where fear and hope fight for control, where disappointment wrestles with faith, and where, in the moments nobody else sees, something beautiful can begin to grow. So wherever you are right now, take a deep breath. Leave behind the noise of the day. Let your mind become still and just listen, because sometimes the message we've been waiting for arrives only after everything around us becomes quiet. There is a season in life that almost everyone goes through, but very few people know how to explain. It isn't always caused by tragedy. Sometimes you have a home, a family, a job, and yet, deep inside, you still feel empty. It's like standing in the middle of a crowded room while carrying a loneliness that nobody else can see. You start questioning yourself. Maybe you wonder if you made the wrong decisions. Maybe you replay old conversations and wish you had said something different. Maybe you think about opportunities you missed or relationships that never healed. And perhaps the hardest part is this: you thought life would feel different by now. You expected more peace, more certainty, more direction. Instead, there are nights when your mind refuses to rest. The future feels uncertain. The past keeps knocking on the door, and the present feels like you're walking through a thick fog with no clear path ahead. But have you ever noticed something about nature? The most important work often happens when nobody can see it. The roots of the tallest tree grow deep in the darkness. A pearl is formed in the hidden depths of the ocean. A butterfly spends time inside a silent cocoon before it ever learns to fly. The world celebrates what is visible, the bloom, the harvest, the victory. But heaven often works in the invisible places. First, maybe this season of waiting is not a punishment. Maybe it is preparation. Think about a farmer planting seeds before winter. If someone walked across his field a week later, they might laugh and say, "Nothing is happening here." But the farmer wouldn't worry, because he knows that the most important part of the process is happening beneath the surface. Just because you cannot see it doesn't mean it isn't real. And maybe that's exactly where you are today. You cannot yet see what your struggles are producing. You cannot measure the quiet changes taking place inside your heart. You cannot understand why certain doors closed or why certain plans fell apart. But what if those endings were making room for a beginning you cannot see yet? What if the delay that frustrates you today is actually protecting you from a path that was never meant for you? Imagine a traveler crossing a long mountain valley. He has a map, he has enough supplies, and he's completely sure he knows where he's going. Then, without warning, a storm arrives. Dark clouds cover the sky. Heavy rain hides the path. The wind becomes so strong that he can barely see a few steps ahead. He stops and cries out, "Why is this happening? I was going the right way." What he doesn't know is that just beyond the next hill, a massive landslide has destroyed the road he planned to take. The storm that delayed him, the storm he begged to escape, was the very thing that saved his life. How many moments in our own lives are like that? A door closes, and we call it rejection. A plan falls apart, and we call it failure. A season of waiting comes, and we think we've been forgotten. But years later, we look back and quietly realize, if everything had happened the way I wanted, I would never have become the person I am today. Real growth rarely comes through comfort. Strength is not built when everything is easy. Patience is not learned when every prayer is answered immediately. Wisdom is not gained by having all the answers. Sometimes the greatest blessing is not that the storm disappears. Sometimes the greatest blessing is discovering that you were never walking through it alone. And maybe that's why, after everything you've been through, you still haven't given up. After every disappointment, after every setback, after every tear that nobody else ever saw, there is still a small part of you that believes tomorrow can be better. There is still a quiet voice inside your heart that whispers, "Keep going, don't stop here." That voice is not weakness. That voice is hope. And hope has a way of surviving, even when everything else feels lost. Have you ever noticed that some of the greatest changes in life happen so slowly that we don't even realize they are happening? A child doesn't notice how much they've grown until old clothes no longer fit. A tree doesn't become tall overnight. The ocean shapes the strongest cliffs in a day, but through years of patient waves touching the same stone. Yet, when it comes to our own lives, we often expect transformation to happen instantly. We pray today and hope tomorrow will be different. We ask for direction and expect the entire path to appear. We hope that one moment of faith will erase years of worrying, but life rarely unfolds that way. Sometimes the answer to a prayer doesn't arrive as a miracle that changes our circumstances. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet change that begins inside us. The strange thing about difficult seasons is that, while we're living through them, they feel meaningless. We count the days, we question the delays, we compare our lives to the lives of others and wonder why they seem to be moving forward while we remain in the same place. But what if waiting has a purpose? Imagine a sculptor standing before a giant block of stone. To everyone else, it looks ordinary, heavy, cold, without beauty. Then the sculptor lifts his hammer. One strike, then another, then another. If the stone could speak, perhaps it would ask, "Why am I being broken? Why am I losing pieces of myself? Why does every strike hurt?" But the sculptor sees something the stone cannot see. He's not destroying it. He's revealing what was hidden inside it all along. Perhaps there are seasons in our own lives that feel exactly like those blows of the hammer. The disappointment that made you stronger, the failure that taught you humility, the goodbye that forced you to discover courage you never knew you possessed. At the time, none of it made sense. You wanted the pain to end. You wanted the uncertainty to disappear. You wanted someone to explain why your journey seemed so much harder than everyone else's. But looking back now, maybe you can already see that some of your hardest moments, you in ways comfort never could. Maybe the person you are becoming could only be shaped through the very things you once wished to avoid. Long ago, there was a small village surrounded by mountains. Every night, a single lantern burned at the highest point above the valley. Travelers depended on its light to find their way home before darkness covered the roads. The keeper of the lantern had a simple task. Every evening, before the sun disappeared, he climbed the mountain carrying oil for the flame. Most people never noticed him. No one applauded his work. Children played in the village below without ever thinking about the light that protected them. But one winter, a terrible storm arrived. The winds were stronger than anyone had ever seen. Snow covered the paths. The mountain trail became almost impossible to climb. The villagers stayed inside their homes and wondered if the lantern would go out. Meanwhile, the old keeper struggled upward through the storm. More than once he slipped. More than once he thought about turning back. No one would blame him, he thought. The weather was too dangerous. The task was too difficult. But he kept climbing. Hours later, exhausted and covered in snow, he reached the summit and lit the lantern. Down below, the travelers who were still on the roads saw the light and found their way safely home. The next morning, the villagers celebrated that everyone had returned safely. But very few of them ever thought about the lonely journey the lantern keeper had taken through the storm. And isn't that often how life feels? Sometimes you think your struggles are meaningless because nobody else can see them. The quiet battles, the tears, the prayers whispered in the darkness, the days you kept going even though you wanted to quit. But what if your perseverance is becoming a light that will one day help someone else find their way? What if one day another person, standing exactly where you are now, will hear your story and realize they are not alone? Pain has a strange way of creating compassion. People who have walked through deep valleys often become the ones who know how to guide others out. There is a question almost every heart asks at some point. Why didn't things work out the way I hoped they would? Maybe you had dreams that never became reality. Maybe someone you trusted walked away. Maybe you worked hard for something that slipped through your fingers at the last moment. It is easy to believe that a closed door means the end of the story. But what if it is only the end of one chapter? Think of someone reading a book and stopping halfway through. The hero seems defeated. Nothing makes sense. The future looks hopeless. If they closed the book right there, they would believe the entire story ended in failure. But the author knows there are still chapters left. Perhaps that is one of the hardest lessons to accept. We live our lives one page at a time, while the bigger picture remains hidden from us. Maybe today you are standing in the middle of a chapter you don't understand. Maybe the pieces seem scattered. Maybe the silence feels endless. Maybe you have been carrying questions that no one around you can answer. But a story is not judged by a single page, and your life is not defined by one difficult season. The chapter you are living now may not be the chapter where everything changes. It may simply be the chapter where you are quietly becoming the person you were always meant to be. So tonight, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking a different question. What is this season trying to teach me? Maybe it is teaching patience. Maybe it is teaching forgiveness. Maybe it is teaching you that your worth was never tied to success, approval, or the opinions of other people. And maybe, just maybe, it is teaching you that even when the road ahead disappears into the fog, you do not have to know every step before taking the next one. Sometimes all that is required is enough faith to keep walking until the light returns. Because there is one thing history, nature, and the human heart all seem to agree on. Winter never stays forever. The longest night eventually gives way to morning. The strongest storms eventually lose their strength. And the seeds hidden beneath the earth eventually rise toward the light. So if you are in a season where nothing seems to be changing, do not mistake stillness for abandonment. Some of the most beautiful beginnings arrive so quietly that we only recognize them after they have already changed our lives. And in the next part of this journey, we are going to explore a truth that has carried people through their darkest moments for generations. What if the battle you are fighting is not meant to destroy your faith, but to reveal a strength you never knew was already within you? Before you leave, I want you to remember one thing. You don't have to have every answer tonight. You don't have to carry tomorrow's weight before it arrives. And you don't have to walk this road by yourself. If this message found you when you needed it most, keep it close to your heart. And if you think someone else might need these words, share them with them. And if you'd like more moments like this whenever life gets heavy, subscribe and come back whenever you need a quiet place to breathe and reflect. Until next time, take care of your heart, keep your faith alive, and never forget, even when the sky looks empty, the dawn is already on its way.